The elevator game is not just a viral challenge. It is a modern manifestation of ancient transgression rituals, originating from South Korean and Japanese occult forums in the late 2000s. This sequence, 42621, is believed to be a spatial decryption code. In Eastern numerology, the number 4 resonates with death, serving as the initial trigger to shift the elevator's frequency toward the yin spectrum. By oscillating between these specific floors, you aren't just moving through a building, you are generating a vertical vortex designed to wear down the fabric of reality. But the ritual's true test begins on the 5th floor. This is where the gatekeeper enters. She is not a ghost, but a manifestation of the center palace, or Zonggong, a spiritual firewall. If you acknowledge her, you acknowledge the void. Once the elevator bypasses your command and surges toward the 10th floor, you have officially left our biological coordinates. In recent years, the supernatural thriller elevator game brought a terrifying internet urban legend to the mainstream. It depicts a ritual that isn't just a game of bravery, but a precise method of dimensional crossing. The core of this legend revolves around a specific sequence of floors, 4, 2, 6, 2, 1. To begin, you must enter a building with at least 10 floors and be entirely alone. The sequence is the key. First, travel to the 4th floor, then down to the 2nd, up to the 6th, back down to the 2nd, and finally to the 1st. This is not a random path. It is a ritualistic calibration of the elevator's internal space. If the sequence is performed correctly, upon pressing the 1st floor button for the last time, the elevator will defy your command. Instead of descending, it will begin to rise, unprompted, toward the 10th floor, marking your successful transition into the unknown. Why this specific sequence? According to occult interpretations of the elevator game, the numbers themselves are believed to carry symbolic weight. In East Asian superstition, the number 4 has long been associated with death, while the repeated movement between even-numbered floors is said to gradually pull the elevator away from the ordinary world and deeper into a spiritually imbalanced state, often described as yin. As the elevator continues its unnatural pattern of ascent and descent, participants claim the atmosphere inside begins to subtly change. The air feels heavier. The silence becomes oppressive, and the building itself starts to feel strangely disconnected from reality, as though the ritual is slowly isolating the elevator from the normal flow of the physical world. But the true turning point occurs on the 5th floor where, in nearly every version of the legend, a woman is said to enter the elevator without warning. Some interpretations describe her as a spirit attached to the ritual, while others believe she is something far more unsettling, a manifestation created by the ritual itself, appearing only after the elevator has crossed a threshold it was never meant to approach. Participants are repeatedly warned not to speak to her, acknowledge her presence, or make eye contact for too long, because according to the folklore, the moment you recognize her existence, the ritual itself begins recognizing yours. And once the elevator ignores your command and starts rising toward the 10th floor on its own, the participant is no longer believed to be in control of where the elevator is taking them. The identity of the woman on the 5th floor varies significantly depending on the version of the legend, and this inconsistency is one of the reasons the elevator game continues to evolve across different online communities rather than remaining a fixed story. In early Korean internet forums, she was not initially described as a ghost in the traditional sense, but rather as an undefined presence, something that simply did not belong in the environment of the elevator, appearing without explanation and disappearing without consequence, as though she existed only as a temporary interruption in the system itself. As the legend spread into Japanese occult message boards in the early 2000s, particularly on platforms such as 2chainz, her description began to shift. Users started referring to her less as a spirit and more as a non-person, an entity without a stable identity, whose lack of defining features made her more unsettling than any conventional ghost story. because she could not be easily categorized or understood. In later English-language retellings on forums such as Reddit, this ambiguity evolved further into what some users began calling the mirror theory, where the woman was described not as an external entity, but as a kind of reflection error, something that appears when the boundary between observer and environment becomes unstable. In most accounts, she is described as featureless or indistinct, not because she is invisible, but because observers report that their memory of her does not remain consistent. Witnesses often claim that the longer they try to recall her appearance, the more her details seem to shift, as though their perception itself is being subtly rewritten. This is why the rule remains consistent across nearly all versions of the story: do not acknowledge her, do not engage with her, and do not attempt to define what she is. Because in the logic of the legend, the act of recognition is not observation, it is interaction. And interaction is what allows the system to respond. If the doors finally open on the 10th floor, most accounts describe an immediate and disorienting shift in perception, rather than a clear change in environment. At first glance, everything appears familiar enough to be mistaken for reality: walls, structures, even the distant outline of a city. Yet nothing behaves in a way that feels fully stable or grounded. The most commonly repeated detail is not visual distortion, but absence. Sound becomes unusually restrained, as though the space is absorbing rather than transmitting noise. Even movement feels detached, with footsteps and breathing appearing slightly delayed, as if the environment is no longer responding in real time. Witnesses often describe the sensation as being inside a space that has been left running without maintenance, functional, but no longer actively connected to anything beyond itself. There is no clear indication of danger, yet every instinct suggests that staying too long produces a gradual sense of cognitive fatigue, as if perception itself is being slowly compressed. Attempts to leave the 10th floor are described as inconsistent. In some accounts, the elevator responds normally. In others, it behaves unpredictably, as though the system no longer fully recognizes the command structure that brought the individual there. What remains consistent is the urgency in these descriptions, the impression that the longer one remains, the more difficult it becomes to reconstruct a coherent sense of direction or return. Because of this, the 10th floor is rarely described as a destination. It is more often framed as a transitional condition, an unstable interval between arrival and recognition, where the environment remains visible, but its meaning becomes increasingly difficult to anchor. Escaping the 10th floor requires more than just pressing a button. It demands a total reclamation of your biological frequency. You must enter the same elevator car and repeat the 42621 sequence in perfect reverse order. But there is a catch. The elevator will resist. As it attempts to surge back toward the crimson void, you must frantically press every other floor button to sabotage its ascent. This is a battle of willpower versus gravity. If the doors open at the first floor, do not step out immediately. Check your surroundings. If the air feels heavy or the light seems fractured, the ritual is not yet over. Failure in the elevator game isn't just death. It is ontological erasure. If you lose your way, you become a spatial echo, a fragment of consciousness trapped in the 10th floor's recycling bin, forever watching the world through a veil of red mist. Worse still is the replacement theory. If you acknowledge the woman on the 5th floor, she may have already harvested your identity. The version of you that returns home will look, speak, and act like you. But it is merely a hollow reflection, a puppet of the void living your life, while the real you remains abandoned in the silence. One of the earliest archived accounts of the elevator game appeared in the early 2010s, posted anonymously on a paranormal discussion board. The writer claimed that after completing the ritual, the elevator ignored the command to descend and instead rose in complete silence toward the 10th floor. When the doors opened, The world outside appeared almost identical to reality, except for one impossible detail.
The sky was red, not bright crimson,
not sunset. The author described it as a deep, suffocating red haze, as though the atmosphere itself had been infected. The building was empty, no voices, no movement, no electricity. He claimed that even the city outside the windows looked abandoned, frozen in place like a paused simulation. The only sound was the elevator itself quietly humming behind him. According to the Post, the silence became physically painful after several minutes. He wrote that the absence of sound felt heavier than noise, causing pressure in his ears and chest. Then he noticed something worse. Far across the empty skyline, on the roof of another building, stood a woman, completely motionless, watching him. The witness immediately returned to the elevator and attempted the return sequence, but the elevator resisted. Several times, it surged upward on its own, trying to pull him back toward the 10th floor. After returning home, he reported a lingering side effect that would later become common in elevator game folklore: mirrors. He claimed his reflection occasionally reacted a fraction of a second too slowly, as though something inside the other world had not fully let him leave. Most archived accounts end the same way. The witness returns, but something feels wrong. However, one testimony from a Japanese occult forum described something far worse. According to the anonymous post, the elevator doors did not open into another world. They opened into a place filled with elevators. A far more disturbing testimony emerged from Japanese occult forums linked to the original elevator to another world legend. The anonymous poster claimed that when the elevator doors opened on the 10th floor, he did not see a hallway. He saw another elevator, then another, stretching endlessly into the darkness. He described the location as an infinite elevator hall, a silent labyrinth containing hundreds of identical elevator doors arranged in perfect rows beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Every elevator appeared almost identical to the one he arrived in. Almost. Some had buttons in the wrong orders. Some emitted faint static noises.
Others smelled faintly of rust, mold, or something decaying behind the walls. The poster became convinced that only one elevator could return him home. The rest, he believed, led somewhere else entirely. He wrote that while searching the hall he began hearing distant elevator chimes echoing through the darkness, followed by the sound of metal doors slowly opening and closing on their own. But no one was there. The most chilling detail came near the end of the testimony. The writer claimed that every elevator display showed a different floor number, even though none of the elevators were moving. Some displayed impossible numbers, negative floors, symbols, digits that did not exist on any normal keypad. He eventually chose an elevator with a scratched number, 1 button, and successfully returned. But according to the final lines of the archived post, he was never certain he chose the correct one. For years afterward, he claimed every elevator he entered felt subtly wrong, as though the floor beneath him was still vibrating somewhere between worlds.
Across the many variations of the elevator game narrative, the final stage is often described in surprisingly consistent terms.
Escape is possible only by retracing the same sequence in reverse, while resisting the elevator's apparent tendency to return to the 10th floor. In most accounts, this is not described as a supernatural battle, but rather as a period of extreme cognitive pressure, where timing, repetition, and awareness must be maintained under conditions of fear and disorientation. Those who claim to have completed the sequence describe the return to the first floor as abrupt and deceptively ordinary. The doors open, the lights appear normal, and the building seems unchanged. However, what follows is where the accounts begin to converge. Many describe a gradual shift in perception in the hours, days, or weeks after the experience. Reflections may feel slightly misaligned, as if attention and movement are no longer perfectly synchronized. Some report an unusual sensitivity to enclosed vertical spaces, particularly elevators, where mechanical sounds or sudden stops trigger disproportionate levels of discomfort or awareness. There are also accounts of lingering sensory impressions, subtle and difficult to verify, such as metallic or electrical sensations that seem to persist without a clear physical source. Whether these are psychological responses, memory reinforcement, or narrative contamination from repeated retellings remains unresolved. What is most consistent across these stories is not a physical transformation, but a shift in attention. Survivors often describe a persistent awareness of elevators as systems, rather than simple transportation, as if the experience has permanently altered how vertical movement is perceived. And so, while the details vary, the pattern remains stable. The elevator game does not appear to end when the doors open on the first floor. For those who believe they have returned, the more unsettling question is not where they went, but what they now notice that others do not.